Good morning, people. So yeah, today we're going to be heading over to, we're going to be doing our tour today in Sachsenhausen concentration camp, which is sort of towards the north of the city. It's in a short while. But yeah, there seems to be the gale force winds again in Berlin. I don't know where this weather's came from, but there we go. So right now I can't remember which city. Do you know which city this is, Tanga? And that is a testament to how attentive I am to my surroundings. You can literally see the name of the town in the background. It's Oranienburg. It's about a 20-minute train ride from Berlin, and it's sort of towards the north. So right now you are seeing the entrance walkway. This is where the prisoners would have walked as they were being admitted into this concentration camp. That building ahead is the main entrance, and that is where the Arbeit macht frei famous inscription is seen in the gate. And as you walk through those gates, this is what you'll see. The camp is sort of aligned in a semicircle shape, with all the cabins that house the inmates sort of facing towards the building that I'm showing you right now. Most of the cabins have been removed, but there are only 2 remaining, which I'm going to show later in this video. What you're seeing right there is the stone mill, which was a form of punishment for insubordinate prisoners. They would be ordered to walk and drag it around in a semicircle shape. I think back and forth 28 times is what the tour guide said, and it was a task that was not designed to be accomplished. It was basically designed to be a killing machine for insubordinate prisoners. This zone with the stones on the floor was a no-go zone. If you entered, then you would be shot, and the fence you're seeing will be wired up to 10,000 volts. Many used it as an easy way of suicide, most notably Joseph Stalin's own son. And just the thing to note, anything you're seeing made of stone or bricks was the original, but anything you're seeing made of wood was rebuilt to look like the original. So as I mentioned earlier, most of the cabins have been removed, but here are the markings as to where they were. All of these cabins would be aligned in a semicircle shape, sort of facing the central guard tower, which was shown earlier. Here are some of the cabins that have been rebuilt to look like the original, and there are only 2 in this concentration camp that remain.
Which means 9 people per bed. So if you look inside there, you can see it's not even the size of a normal single bed. So if you slept there, you have.
So this is entering the cabin, and yes, just to clarify, this is where the prisoners would have slept. The conditions were absolutely rancid, and disease was one of the biggest killers in Nazi concentration camps. And the amount of people that were crammed into these barracks was 150 to 400 people. Most of the prisoners in Sachsenhausen were foreigners and/or belonged to persecuted groups such as Jews, Sinti Roma, Jehovah's Witnesses, homosexuals, and Soviet prisoners of war. It's also worth noting that in these concentration camps there was no formality whatsoever. If a guard didn't like the way you looked or the way you took off your hat, you could be sent to the brickmakers or to the stone mill, which would basically be a death sentence. Survival in this concentration camp would largely depend on what job you were given. One of the worst jobs to get was the brickmakers, which a average life expectancy as a brickmaker would be 2 weeks. The worst jobs were always given to the Jews, as they were the most persecuted group, and the best treated of the prisoners would probably be the prisoners of war. One group of inmates that would receive preferential treatment would be the capos. The capos were special prisoners that were appointed as guards to oversee the work of the other prisoners. Being a capo would typically mean not having to do hard labor and being given more food rations. Like messages people have written down. To be honest, I was pretty surprised to find graffiti in a place like this, and I was even more surprised to find people who had written down their Instagram handles and their TikTok handles, and I just thought, you know, wow, in a concentration camp, in a memorial, like really? So this building here is solitary confinement, and this would be where the biggest enemies of the Nazi regime would be. There'll be political prisoners, spies, as well as religious leaders. That bed you see there would be completely full of straw, and there was no insulation in any of these buildings, so it was as cold as it was outside as it was inside. So those 3 poles there were a form of torture. The prisoners would be bound with their hands behind their back, and they would be hung on those poles, so their arms would be bending up, and the injuries from that would be lifelong, so that afterwards, if they did survive, they would never be able to raise their arms above their heads anymore. We only had to be in this terrible weather for about 2 hours, but the inmates in Sachsenhausen, they would have had to work in this weather all day in really thin uniforms. I think that just puts a lot into perspective, and it's quite a profound thing to consider. So this building we're actually approaching right now, encapsulated in this like white fascia, is the actual gas chambers of Sachsenhausen. Now, Sachsenhausen was not an extermination camp, it was a concentration camp, but it did have a small gas chamber. And you'll notice that the actual building has been removed. This was removed during the Soviet era, and the only thing that remain are sort of the foundations and the actual floor plan of where the actual gas chamber was. So yes, this part of the camp was where a lot of the persecuted groups in Sachsenhausen were executed. I don't want to get the details wrong, but I know this building comprises of mainly a gas chamber that was disguised as a shower, and a morgue and a crematorium. It's a really interesting, probably one of the best tours I've done. Live anywhere I've been. I learned a lot. And it's good to reflect and to empathize with what ones who face persecution, what they face, the complications. It's just great to reflect and learn from history. So yeah, it's an experience.